Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for watching and sharing this with your family and friends. And please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And just a reminder that Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing is brought to you by TRAVELOPOD. If you love travel in destinations like Africa, Japan, Antarctica, India, and the Northern Lights regions, then start your next journey with TRAVELOPOD. Visit vacation.travelopod.com and explore the wonders of the world.
Some of the latest wisdom science in positive psychology and social psychology and cognitive science confirms that just because you go through a tragedy does not mean it will make you stronger and it'll make you wiser. Just because you went through a ton of bad shit does not mean you will become a badass person.
Is there such thing as good or bad life lessons or wisdom? Does every moment have wisdom attached to it?
Asking good, meaningful questions is a process of reaching for depth. And the more beautiful, the more anchored the question is, the more deeper you're casting the net to collect whatever it catches. Hi, my name is Deepak Ramola. I'm a wisdom historian and an author. And this is Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Yeah. My name is Abhay Dandekar, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing."
So, welcome everyone to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. One of the elements that I've discovered over the years in sharing conversations here is how important our own self-determination is and the awareness that we need to build trust. Through ongoing inner learning or outward expression, our human experiences matter first and foremost to ourselves. And sharing those lessons as a community contributes so much to our collective energy. Sometimes it certainly helps to have an accelerator of this work, and that's why I'm so grateful to share some time today with wisdom historian Deepak Ramola. Deepak is a scholar, a poet, an artist, an author, and perhaps most importantly, a fellow human who craves, collects, and shares beauty through the experiences and the people he meets. To add to that, he's a learner, an educator, and someone who has Harvard, MIT, and Stanford on his resume. And he's also the founder and artistic director behind Project Fuel and the author of the book, 50 Toughest Questions of Life. It's so wonderful to share a conversation with him. Deepak, thank you so much for joining Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing today.
Thank you so much, Abhay, for creating a space for these conversations. Happy to be here.
I was looking at your website the other day, and among the things that I was just so overjoyed to read about were some of the things you're doing, but particularly some of the things you failed at and some of the things that you continue to learn.
Yes.
And I was struck by one thing that you mentioned, that you've failed at avoiding procrastination. So I'm so curious at this very moment, what are you procrastinating perhaps right now?
Wow. I am due to finish 3 of my driving classes. I am learning driving, and then came the holiday season and the winter break, and I was away traveling. And my driving instructor has texted me a few times saying, "Hey, do you want to resume it?" And I'm like, God, I don't know if I'm ready from my holiday slumber to get into this very high intense driving mode again. So that's one thing, amongst many other things that I'm procrastinating, but that's on top of mind. I think the other thing is just reading. I've been wanting to create like a block of time and just read. I think it's part procrastination, part scheduling, but yeah, that's another thing that's on my list. I'm like, I have a bunch of stuff to get through.
Is there a importance to that action potential and I wouldn't say the art of procrastination, but perhaps, is there a science to procrastination? Is it actually just part of our learning process? And I often will ask people about this as to whether or not they have rituals or anchors in their day. And for some, it just frankly involves kind of thinking and thought process and, the science of procrastination. Is that something that either prepares or maybe even accelerates the work as a wisdom historian?
I mean, psychologically, people would say, there is fear associated with procrastination. You are
Mm.
avoiding something with a sense of
Right.
urgency because there is an underlying thread of some sense of fear. From a philosophical lens, I would say it is letting things emerge when they need to emerge. The fact
Yeah.
that you're not doing it in this very moment, that means either you lack resources or will or a sentiment to get this done, or there is something else competing with this work. So I think from this philosophical lens, it is really about resourcefulness. And when you are resourced, you jump at doing things because you're prepared. I have seen, in collecting wisdom and stories of people from around the world, that procrastination is a fascinating tool of data gathering. What do
Mm.
you procrastinate about, and how often do you procrastinate? If somebody looked at my resume and my trajectory, they would never believe I
I'm
procrastinate.
a professional procrastinator.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I get a lot done, but I also get it done at a slower speed. In my case, I mean, without generalizing it for the world, I often notice that things brew in my head. I have to have them simmered. I need to have that formulated in my mind before I can get to my computer to do something.
Mm.
Or I need to be absolutely brave enough and courageous enough to sit in the car seat to say I'm ready to drive. Because
Right.
if I'm still stuck in the book I'm writing, if I'm still at the poem that I need to finish, if I'm still over the class curriculum I need to create for the course I'm teaching, that means I'm not fully present. And in my case, I think procrastination is a portal to allow myself to be fully present when I get to that activity.
Mm.
Now, why does one need to do that in the first place? I think that's where the productivity syndrome part comes in. A lot
Yeah.
of us high achievers start by creating to-do lists that are impossible to achieve in the first place. In a regular schedule of the week, maybe you can do 10 things, you schedule 25, you get 10 done, you still feel bad about the other 15. And there is
Yeah.
always so much to do and so much to learn and so much to create that you're always behind schedule. So I would humbly accept that I think what I am wrestling with underneath my procrastination is my productivity syndrome. And so if
Mm.
I can cut down some of the things I think I can do in a week to what I can truly do, maybe I will not call myself a professional procrastinator in a few.
Well, and the idea behind that, as you mentioned, in being someone who is thoughtful about wisdom and especially where it comes from, you don't need to be a productivity hero to expound on wisdom. You don't need to be someone with a long resume again. And we categorize these things often into good or bad, or very, very binary terms of, this is actually a positive thing or a negative thing. And I'm just curious, is there such thing as good or bad life lessons or wisdom? We're so quick to look at this binary world, but does every moment have wisdom attached to it, no matter whether it's in the procrastinating zone or in the productivity zone? And does everything always have to have that qualifier of just good and bad?
The binary of the good and bad, I would say, is a more mythical tool of storytelling.
Yeah.
If you see Indian scriptures, if you see most ancient text, it sort of distinguishes between the ignorant and the wise self. There isn't really a characteristic of who's good, who's bad. Is Ravan good or bad? He was a
Yeah.
scholar, he was a devotee of Shiva.
Yeah.
So he's good, but then he, does what he does. And you have the whole Ramayana to justify it, and the abduction of Sita and the wars and the ego that needs a golden castle and a mansion to satiate itself. We all contain those dualities, and
Mm.
allowing ourselves to accept that is to accept, well, then what is the distinction really about? And I think in most wisdom traditions, most text, you will hardly see this conflict or this debate about the good versus the bad. It would be really about the ignorant versus the informed. It would be about the indifferent versus the loved one. It would be about someone who is in a dark state of mind, which is also uncertainty and unknowingness of things, to someone who is absolutely clear and sure about what they're doing and the purpose they're doing it for. So, to answer your question, I feel like the fairness is really asking, do I know better?
Mm.
Versus, am I a good person or a bad person? Am I
Right.
wise is as dubious as, invalid a question as am I good? Can you be good all the time? That's impossible. For whom? In what context? How much? All of those indicators limit us from knowing or over-inform us from not knowing we are good people. Similarly, you can't be wise all the time. You can take wiser decisions. You can have wiser reasoning as and when needed in a particular context. From a scientific lens, you might have seen one can give an amazing piece of advice to other people. If your friend comes to you and says, I had a breakup and what should I do? You might have the perfect advice to say, take time off, rest it out, eat a pizza. Do you want to go out clubbing? You want to watch a movie? Whatever it is that you think your friend may need. You
Yeah.
go through a breakup and you're paralyzed. You don't know what to do. You're this numb shell of your own self. So we are
Yeah.
so good at giving advice to others, not to ourselves. They call it the Solomon paradox. Solomon was a great king who was wise and gave amazing advice to others, but his own personal life was marred with conflicts and
Right.
dichotomies. And so for us to be able to live the duality of that, to be able to be absolutely wise and servicing others, whereas not being able to stand up and scaffold our own pain and our own grief, shouldn't discount that we are now bad people because we can help others and we can't have ourselves. Decision making says binaries are always limiting. You should always have three options. And I think
Yeah.
the third option is the grace you allow yourself to find out more, to learn better so that you can take a more informed decision.
Hi, friends. You may have visited Italy and seen all the highlights, but exploring Europe or Asia for a more immersive vacation is where the details truly matter. That's why so many trust TRAVELOPOD for personalized custom experiences. From small group travel to complex planning for any destination, the pros at TRAVELOPOD can help make your trip seamless, affordable, and unforgettable. With thousands of 5-star ratings and stress-free booking and support, TRAVELOPOD is your trusted partner for unforgettable experiences around the world. Visit vacation.travelopod.com. There's a line that I've seen you share where you mentioned that we are each other's alarm clocks.
Mm.
And I'm curious in this context of needing each other to constantly remind each other of that self-help, that help that we give to others, that grace that you mentioned. How does that framing of we are each other's alarm clocks particularly resonate in a 2026 world?
Mm. There is no new wisdom, is what I've discovered. It all
Yeah.
exists. There are only newer contexts in which existing wisdom applies, which is to say, there are no new morals to the stories. There are only new stories and new characters that end up reaching the same moral of the story. If you pick up Panchatantra, if you pick up Harry Potter, if you pick a book that came maybe last week, if you pick Heated Rivalry, which is like, this hot show right now, they all indicate towards the same basic lessons we've been trying to learn since the beginning of time. So, what do we do then with each other? We as human beings know a lot. If I, as a wisdom historian, shared lessons, you'd be like, I know that. I know you have to be kind. I know you have to be patient. So there is nothing I can tell you which will be an aha. Maybe the way I frame it will be the aha, but not the essence of it. The reason I say we are all each other's alarm clocks is because from time to time we forget all that we know. And
Yeah.
so, in these fleeting moments of forgetfulness, when an Abhay shows up saying something, he becomes an alarm clock to that forgetful, that ignorant, that oblivious part of me that knows it is important to be kind. I'll give you an example. You or anybody knows you should call parents.
Right.
Most of my students have this dilemma. It's like, how often should you call parents? There is no formula to relationships.
Yeah.
So, you should call parents. And then weeks go by and you don't call parents. You're busy with assignments, work, scheduling, everything that goes on in a regular life. You go to listen to a TED Talk on relationships. And the scientist, after 30 years of studying relationships, says, well, relationships are important and they're the most important factors of happiness. And you should start by calling your parents as a call to action. So you come
Yeah.
home and you call your parents. Now, you have known calling your parents is an important thing all along, but now that TED talk or that conversation with the friend over the dinner table or that story you read or someone close to you lost one of their parents this week, and it acts as a reminder. And so that's why I say that these external factors are often the alarm clocks. You know, when you go to bed, you should wake up early morning, and start your day. But
Yeah.
you don't trust yourself often enough to remember that and to wake up. So you
Right.
set an alarm clock, and when it rings, you leave the bed and you start your day. And I think that's the best kind of kindness we can do in the world in 2026 is to
Mm.
be present, mindful, and brave alarm clocks to each
Yeah.
other on what is possible.
That bravery that you mentioned, the presence that you mentioned of being each other's alarm clocks, we can do that through relationship building, but oftentimes we don't necessarily have structure and form to this. It seems like it's coming by either chance or by choice, and instead of actually being in a way framed for us. And I'm curious about one thing. You often share this concept of learning through living, and one that's sort of the basis and the ethos for Project Fuel. And I know that there was a watershed moment that your mom went through, and that you sort of have taken and really helped accelerate for so many. You've also been affiliated with some of the most prestigious academic institutions in the world. Does learning through living need structure, or at least need that structure to scale and be evangelized, to produce TED Talks and have academic credibility? Did you need structure or even the institutions to advance an endeavor like Project Fuel?
Hmm. That's a great question, and I think it's a good fat question about resources, about opportunities, about skills, and about scale. If I were to unpack the very fundamental thing that you started with, you know, this essence of living as an instrument of learning, I think that is true for everybody. There
Yeah.
is no system and form that dictates it. There are catalysts that that progress it faster. And what I mean by catalyst is, if you're going living your life, I cannot tell you, Abhay, how many people I have met in the world over the age of 60 that I asked the question to, what is your life lesson, and that they had no answer.
Mm.
And not
Yeah.
because they didn't know it, but because they never paused to think and articulate it.
Yeah.
For 60 plus years of their life, of what
Yeah.
has this life taught them. And so I think it is not so much in the structure of like, oh, you sit every week and you write down something profound. It is about the ritual of being able to pause often enough. It is about the sincerity of using the catalyst of reflection, using the catalyst of perspective to be able to create whatever form and shape there is to create for you. We often get held up and caught in the parameters, the formulas, and the templates other people suggest, right? There is somebody telling you to wake up at 5 a.m. and join the 5 a.m. morning club, and then, have finished your workout by 6 o'clock, and by 7, you should have had your protein shake and meditation, and then by
Yeah.
8 o'clock.
It's how trends develop.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so we love someone giving us a template. What
Yeah.
we avoid is seeing what are the ingredients of this recipe. Because my recipe may look very different, my meal may look very different, but what are the ingredients? So I always caution myself and people, don't really look for systems, because systems are designed for people who operate in a certain behavior under certain circumstance. All of our circumstances are completely different. If I have an India call at 1 a.m., sitting in America, how will I wake up at 5 a.m.? That ruins the other template that says you should have 8 hours of sleep, right?
Yeah.
So you have competing ideologies. But to sum up the second part of the question, I think the greatest system by default is that your life is giving you opportunities every single moment to make sense of something. It is all uncertain and it's all unfolding. And in that dynamic process, as you become a participant, you have the chance to not only experience something, but to learn something from it. Some of the latest
Yeah.
wisdom science in positive psychology and social psychology and cognitive science confirms that just because you go through a tragedy does not mean it will make you stronger and it'll make you wiser. Now that
Yeah.
breaks a age-old myth, oh, suffering makes us wiser, pain makes us wiser. Science shows that's not true. Just because you went
Yeah.
through a ton of bad shit does not mean you will become a badass person.
That's
You
right.
may just actually become the opposite. And so the question is, so how do I use this experience into learning something important? And that pattern recognition, that insight discovery requires for us to introspect, requires for us to contrast it with our experiences and experiences of others in the world. It requires for us to establish relationships between this moment and something else that is completely different but is joined together. We study math
Yeah.
devoid of poetry. We study poetry devoid of science. But we need these connections from the educational premise itself to train people in the world to see connections between two polar opposite things and know that it is true
Mm.
for you too. And so, as the last thing I would say to that question of scale, we are obsessed in the world with scale. And we think
Yeah.
scale looks going up and broadening and expanding. And I think in many world cultures, scale looks going deeper, just digging deep
Right.
into one thing. If we can make peace with that, I think we will land in a place in the world where we all feel successful, not because we created 10,000 companies, but because we took one idea and stayed
Mm.
true to unpacking it throughout our lives.
You and I are both global citizens, and we understand the current nature of many of the things that you just said. I mean, some of which are, of course, important, profound realizations and also hit at the cutting edge of research in these fields. But for you personally, as someone who is going through their own lived experience, what have you had to particularly let go of or unlearn about yourself in order for you to embrace that concept of wisdom being important to be a currency of ignorance versus knowledge versus depth versus scale? How have you had to in a way kind of unprogram yourself so that you can embrace some of these concepts?
Mm, that's a beautiful question. I mean, so much more than learning. I think unlearning had to happen and has to happen continuously for me. At the very start of this journey was the idea of who is wise. We saw
Mm,
wisdom as a feature and an outcome of the domains of philosophy and religion. When I was growing up, especially in India, you cannot separate it outside the religious and the philosophical dimension.
yeah.
And to make wisdom not sit on a pedestal but make it pedestrian, almost to see it in every single person, from age, gender, economic group, social, cultural backgrounds, to be able to see it and to know it true required so much unprogramming of sorts. As you were mentioning, my mother was a big force because she didn't go to school and knows so much and is an amazingly wise person. But when you sit across a sex worker in Kamatipura and you ask her questions about and knowledge about customer negotiation, you have to let go of all the business school books you have read that tell you
Right.
that it's only at a X branded business school you get the lessons about customer negotiation. So that's fundamentally on the root level. I had to sort of sandpaper
Yeah.
this resistance to the communities I thought I could get
Mm,
wisdom from, and to make myself a little bit more resilient, a little bit more open to collectives, to people who I thought I could collect wisdom from. Sometimes because of my own fear, I thought, what would I do sitting in a red light district? What will people
yeah.
say? And I think some of those stereotypes and biases had to be unlearned. The second thing was, when I was 17, 18, and sitting across victims of abuse and survivors of human trafficking and children who were learning under the Taliban, Syrian refugees. I mean, I was just discovering my own way of interviewing these people and collecting their stories. And often in those early years, I would cry more than the person telling me the story. I
Yeah.
remember this one time I was sitting across a woman who was trafficked at the age of 16, I believe, if I remember correctly, and sold to this red light district, this one particular brothel in Sonagachi, and her entire life had been, since that moment, a life of challenges and complexity. And as she's telling me the details of that story, I start to sob, and she had to get up from her bed that she was sitting on, come over to my side of the chair and tell me, "I'm all right. I'm okay. I think I'll be fine." And when I came back to my house, I thought, I am never going to let that happen. I'm never going to let my emotion dictate the story someone has for themselves. And so I
Yeah.
had to unlearn, blurting out my emotionality and my sensitivity and my empathy override someone else's story. And I think it took a while, but I finally got there somehow.
No, I love that because you're right. When we are projecting our own emotions, and sometimes they are highly, highly interwoven into the reception of the story, but you're absolutely right that it never should come at the expense of the person who's emoting that their own story and narrating their own wisdom and narrating their own experiences. Hi, I'm Abhay Dandekar, and if you have an animal in your life that you love, then I want to introduce you to the Timberdog Rough Rest, the only dog bed you'll ever need. The patented Rough Rest is compact and light with over 14 travel features, comes in 3 sizes, and has everything from storage for essentials to a built-in sleeping bag. The New York Times Wirecutter calls it a versatile, portable dog bed with lots of extras for traveling or camping. Go to timberdog.com to explore Rough Rest, the only dog bed you'll ever need. All of this leads back to one thing that you and I perhaps both love, and that's poetry. And I'm so curious of someone who's a student of poetry, as someone who expresses poetry so beautifully. How for you and why is poetry the kind of love language of peace?
Maya Angelou, the great African American poet, used to say, "Poetry is music for human voice." And I think not only that is true, but it also connects to my own fundamental belief of what poetry does. To be an instrument of wisdom in the world, to understand wisdom of other people, and to pass on your own wisdom to others, you need metaphors. Metaphors are the greatest treasure chest in which you can store the wisdom you have and pass it on. From the longest time in history, if you see proverbs, if you see idioms, we've been using them to unpack what our ancestors meant in their time and space. And they still hold true because
Yeah.
we've been able to pack, or they have been able to pack, so much of lived experience into metaphors. The reason I love poetry is twofold. First, it teaches you how to discover, second, interpret, and third, produce metaphors yourself. And we are becoming very literal people. And so poetry is that mini island on which we can stand and still see the world through metaphors and similes and these poetic instruments that allow us to make sense of the abstract and find meaning in the obscure.
Yeah.
And that skill is a fundamental human skill we will need as much as we need AI in the future, according to all the pundits and the experts. I think we need the skill of metaphor making. And when you say, what is the school to go to for metaphor making? It is poetry. So that's
Yeah.
one critical piece. And the second is language is what human beings do.
Hmm.
And poetry is the greatest weaving technique of language. It allows you to fold so much of complexity in such simple words and present it to another person to devour. So I say poetry is like a buffet for those who are hungry, and
Yeah.
it is an appetizer for those who just had something else. So there is always something that can be fed through the domains of poetry.
And I know that, I mean, to use that, go further on that, we're always hungry for great poetry that captures our imaginations and again, sort of is this wonderful connector for humanity. In thinking about your work and when I think about it, I realize, of course, and this is not something profound or new, but that wisdom is so agnostic to our own identities, right? It is something that transcends, we can learn from anyone, anywhere. It's not bound by geography or religion or dogma in a way. So, with that as sort of a backdrop, why is your Indianness or your Indian Americanness or your South Asianness or elements of your identity, how does that actually factor in to your work?
It's the flavor in the food, right?
Mm,
If it's the same potato, you add a little Indian spice, it's a different potato.
it's
They-
all about food, right?
It's all about food. And so the metaphor of food is very alive because my dad is a chef in the Indian military. So that's,
Oh boy.
that's my
Yeah.
backdrop. I think our cultural, national, our religious tonalities are lenses through which we look at the world.
Mm,
And those lenses are important because without those lenses, what do you really see? If
yeah.
everything is the same, then what do you understand? I often say the reason it becomes interesting is because when I talk about the idea of space, I talk it about from the concept of Brahmand. We say
Mm,
Brahma created the Brahmand, and Brahmand in the Western world often translates to the universe, which is inaccurate because Brahmand actually means space.
yeah.
Brahma had to first create the space in which the universe could reside, and the cosmos and the asteroids and the planets could be put. So, space is the essence of creation.
Mm,
Now, you go to the Japanese, and they have the concept of the ma. If you clap, the space between that two hands merging, that sound is ma, is that pause, is that liminal space.
yeah.
And they talk about space in a completely different way. We're talking about still space, but we are talking about it with the costumes and the embroideries of the
Mm,
language and the lenses we have been afforded by our culture. And
yeah.
so the more we dig deep, there's a beautiful poet who recently passed away, a novelist, Vinod Kumar Shukla, great Hindi literary legend. He used to say, the more local you are, the more universal you are.
Mm,
And I love that thought because what he's trying to say is the more refined, the more spotless, the more stainless your lens is, the more you'll be able to see the world and see it is really the same thing, but you're able to see it from a different lens and connect with others with a more nuanced approach to life.
boy, I'm not even sure how I can follow that because it is, packed with so much beauty there. And I really do appreciate this whole idea that the more local we are, the more concentrated we are, the more gifted we are at finding those local nuances and those intricacies, the more universal we can make those applications. I want to leave you with this and try and get you out of here with this thought. We live in a world that is constantly full of contrasts and beauty and difficulties and challenges, but most importantly, very, very tough questions. And this is something that you've tackled before in your writing. How do you practice getting better at both asking those questions and then grappling with the truisms and the fears and the emotions of the potential answers that follow in asking those questions?
I think it is David Copperrider who says, we live in the world our questions create. And somehow the industrial revolution, the industrialization of learning and education has convinced and scarred us to give amazing answers and forget what questions we are asking. And I think the rootedness of our entire being is in not really giving amazingly articulate answers, but in investigating important, difficult questions. People think questions are problems to be solved. I think questions are ideas to be understood. And when you ask a good question, you propose a new idea. You allow someone to unpack what they haven't before. You allow them to reach so deep within them to dig up something that either has been ignored, for granted, or has been unattended for a while. So for me, the question of tough questions is not tough just the sake for provocation, for the sake of notoriety, for the sake of intellect. Asking good, meaningful questions is a process of reaching for depth. And the more beautiful, the more anchored the question is, the more deeper you're casting the net to collect whatever it catches. And you can never control what it catches. Sometimes it's going to catch some beautiful fish. Sometimes it's going to catch absolute garbage on the bottom of the ocean. And sometimes it will bring up things you didn't even know existed, in that ocean of thought and experience. And so questions are ideas. And if you're not asking good questions, you're not allowing people to think newer ideas. I often say, if you really want to have a lab where innovation happens, have a mind that produces amazing questions and ask people that. One of the questions recently I have switched basis something I read online was this question of how are you? And we always ask this question of how are you 10 times a day, maybe 50 or 500 times a week, depending on how many people we interact with. And I came a version of the question and I sort of tweaked it to ask myself and other people, so what has it been being you lately? It's the same intent, but they are two completely different questions. If I saw you on a street and instead of saying, so how are you, Abhay? So, hey, what has it been being you this week? It would produce a whole different set because you would be paused in your track to not give an automated response, but to reach within you to configure and answer a response, a feeling that is authentic to whatever that sprung.
It also forces the responder for a moment that to do something that we don't always do very frequently, and that is think outside of ourselves and look from the outside and examine what that experience is like. How often are you answering that for yourself?
A lot. I try to journal every day. In fact, just before we got on this call, I was trying to do a journal of my yesterday and today, and I try to think in the shower. I try to go on walks every day, even for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And I try to ask myself that question. What does it mean to me be me now? What does it mean for me to be here? The questions and the shapes and the durations of it might change. But I think there is always a moment in my day when I find myself sitting under a tree, metaphorical or literal. I can try to assimilate the magnanimity of what it means to be alive and what it means to be me, someone who has had a chance to interact with so many people. The good thing about teaching wisdom, or the good thing about being a teacher, is that you can't tell people do as I say. You have to say do as I do. So you have to practice and embody or try to embody this wisdom that you collect yourself. And so I am en route doing that. I don't think so I've made it all the way, but I'm en route doing that.
Well, I have to tell you, we're all enjoying the journey that you're on, and hopefully more than anything else, having that introspection, doing it with kindness and compassion, and as you have mentioned so eloquently and with such care and beauty before, forwarding the understanding of every life lesson. Deepak, thank you so much for joining me today. This was really a treat, and I hope we can catch up again in the future.
Yes, and thank you so much for your very, very thoughtful questions. On the idea of questions, yours were truly amazing. I really enjoyed them. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Deepak. And please check out more of Deepak's books and poetry and work at deepakramola.com. Don't forget to please share Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing with friends and family, and subscribe wherever you might be listening or watching. A couple of big food shout outs in this episode. 2 California chefs who are making impact. First, my man Ash Gondarekar, a pizza artist making authentic and fresh Naples-style pizza throughout the Bay Area. And then to my brother in name and spirit, Chef Neil Dandekar over at Sea and Sky at Hotel La Jolla for creating great food experiences for so many. Putting links for both in the show notes, and a reminder again to please be kind to each other and to the planet. Till next time, I'm Abhay Dandekar.